The rain hammered against the windows of my cramped apartment in Norfolk, Virginia, each drop seeming to echo the hollow feeling in my chest. I stared at the formal invitation in my hands, its elegant gold lettering mocking me with every word. Commander Michael Ross cordially invites you to celebrate his promotion to captain at the Officers Club, Naval Station, Norfolk. The date was circled in red ink. Tomorrow evening. But there was no invitation for me. There never was. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I set the invitation down on my kitchen table, right next to the stack of bills, and my laptop displaying yet another rejection email from a civilian job application. 23 years of service to the United States Navy, and this is where I found myself, forgotten, overlooked, and apparently invisible to my own family. My name is Sarah Ross, and until 6 months ago, I was Commander Sarah Ross, until the incident that changed everything. The apartment felt smaller than usual as I paced between the kitchen and living room, my bare feet silent on the cold linoleum. Outside, the November wind carried the distant sound of ships' horns from the naval base where I'd spent the better part of my adult life. Where my brother Michael was now preparing to pin on his captain's bars, surrounded by colleagues, friends, and family who would congratulate him on his achievement. Everyone except me. It hadn't always been this way. Growing up in a military family in San Diego, Michael and I were inseparable. Our father, Colonel James Ross, had instilled in both of us a deep respect for service and duty. Our mother, Linda, had been the steady force that kept our family grounded through multiple deployments and relocations. We'd moved from base to base, always supporting each other, always proud of our family's legacy of service. Michael, being 3 years older, had always been the golden child. Star quarterback in high school, Naval Academy graduate, fast-tracked through the officer ranks. He had the kind of natural charisma that made people want to follow him, the kind of smile that could disarm any situation. I'd always been proud of him, even when his achievements overshadowed my own. I'd chosen a different path through the ranks. While Michael commanded destroyers and earned commendations for his leadership in surface warfare, I'd specialized in intelligence operations. My work was quieter, more behind the scenes, but no less critical. I'd spent years in secure facilities, analyzing threats, coordinating with other agencies, and protecting assets that most people would never know existed. The irony wasn't lost on me that my expertise in intelligence gathering had ultimately been my downfall. Walking to my bedroom, I pulled out a small wooden box from the back of my closet. Inside were my service medals, ribbons, and commendations, evidence of a career that had once meant everything to me. The Navy Achievement Medal with 3 gold stars, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal. Each one represented years of dedication, sacrifice, and service to my country. But none of them mattered now. 6 months ago, everything changed during what should have been a routine intelligence briefing. I'd been working with a joint task force investigating potential security breaches within the Naval Intelligence Network. The work was sensitive, requiring the highest levels of clearance and discretion. I'd been handpicked for the assignment because of my spotless record and my reputation for thoroughness. The investigation had led me to discover something that would change everything: evidence of systematic information leaks that traced back to high-ranking officials within the naval command structure. The kind of discovery that could destroy careers, end marriages, and shatter the trust of an entire institution. When I'd reported my findings through proper channels, I'd expected swift action. Instead, I'd been met with skepticism, delay, and eventually, outright hostility. The very people I'd trusted to handle the sensitive information had turned it against me. Within weeks, I'd found myself under investigation for the very crimes I'd been working to expose. Allegations of mishandling classified information, unauthorized access to restricted databases, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. The evidence against me was circumstantial at best, but it was enough to destroy my reputation and end my career. The investigation had been swift and decisive. Rather than face a court-martial with uncertain outcomes, I'd been given a choice: resign quietly with an honorable discharge and keep my benefits, or fight the charges and risk losing everything, including my pension and veterans benefits. It was a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. My resignation had been processed quickly and quietly. No fanfare, no ceremony, no acknowledgement of my years of service. One day, I was Commander Sarah Ross, a respected intelligence officer with a promising career ahead of me. Next, I was a civilian, struggling to find my place in a world that suddenly seemed foreign and unwelcoming. The worst part wasn't the loss of my career or the financial uncertainty, it was the isolation. The friends and colleagues who'd once sought my counsel and valued my expertise now avoided me as if I carried some contagious disease. Phone calls went unreturned. Invitations stopped coming. Even my own family seemed to maintain a careful distance. Michael had been supportive in his own way, but I could see the questions in his eyes. He'd never asked directly if the allegations were true, but I could sense his doubt, his uncertainty about whether his sister had actually compromised national security. The fact that he'd never definitively voiced his belief in my innocence spoke volumes. Our parents had been devastated. Dad, who'd spent 30 years in the Army and valued honor above all else, had struggled to understand how his daughter could have fallen so far. Mom had tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes, the way she looked at me as if I were a stranger. The invitation to Michael's promotion ceremony had come through Mom, not directly from him. "I'm sure he just forgot to send you one," she'd said over the phone, her voice carefully neutral. "You know how busy he's been with the change of command preparations." But I knew better. Michael hadn't forgotten. He'd made a conscious choice not to invite me, probably hoping to avoid any uncomfortable questions about his disgraced sister. The promotion ceremony was his moment to shine, to celebrate his achievements and his bright future. My presence would only serve as a reminder of failure and scandal. I'd spent the last 6 months trying to rebuild my life, applying for civilian jobs that would utilize my skills and experience. But the shadow of my resignation followed me everywhere. Background checks revealed the circumstances of my departure from the Navy, and potential employers inevitably chose other candidates. The few interviews I'd managed to secure had been awkward affairs, with hiring managers clearly uncomfortable with my military background and the vague explanations I could provide about why I'd left service. The financial pressure was mounting. My savings were depleting faster than I'd anticipated, and the small apartment in Norfolk was all I could afford. The irony of living so close to the naval base where I'd once worked, where I could hear the sounds of ships and aircraft going about their daily operations, was not lost on me. Some nights, I'd sit on my small balcony and watch the lights of the base in the distance, remembering what it felt like to be part of something bigger than myself, to surf with purpose and pride, to wear the uniform and know that my work mattered. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows as I prepared a simple dinner of pasta and canned sauce. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. I'd grown accustomed to the solitude, but tonight it felt particularly oppressive. Tomorrow evening, while Michael celebrated his promotion surrounded by family and friends, I'd be here alone, probably watching Netflix and pretending I didn't care. Pretending that being excluded from my own brother's milestone didn't cut deeper than any professional disappointment ever could. But as I sat there in my quiet apartment, staring at the invitation that had never come, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Call it intuition, call it wishful thinking, but after months of feeling like I was drifting without purpose or direction, I sensed that tomorrow might bring something unexpected. I just had no idea how right I would be. The morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning as memories of my naval career played on an endless loop in my mind. By 7 a.m., I was already dressed in my running gear, desperate for something to clear my head before facing another day of job applications and rejection emails. The streets of Norfolk were quiet at this hour, with only a few early commuters and fellow joggers sharing the sidewalks. I chose a route that would take me past the naval base, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe I was torturing myself, or maybe I needed to confront the ghosts of my past head-on. As I rounded the corner near the main gate, I spotted a familiar figure in dress blues walking toward the base entrance. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Chen, my former colleague from the Intelligence Division. We'd worked together on several classified projects, and she'd been one of the few people who'd maintained contact after my resignation, though our conversations had become increasingly infrequent. "Sarah?" she called out, her voice carrying a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite identify. "What are you doing here?" I slowed to a walk, catching my breath. "Just out for a run. Didn't expect to see anyone I knew." Jessica glanced around nervously, as if she were afraid of being seen talking to me. "I heard about Michael's promotion." "That's tonight, right?" "So I've been told." I kept my voice neutral, not wanting to burden her with my family drama. "Listen, Sarah." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There's something you should know. About your case. About what really happened." My heart rate, which had just begun to slow from my run, spiked again. "What do you mean?" "I can't talk about it here. Too many ears." She looked around again, then pulled out her phone. "Meet me at the Starbucks on Colley Avenue in an hour. The one near the Botanical Gardens." "And Sarah? Don't tell anyone about this conversation." Before I could respond, she was walking quickly toward the base entrance, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with more questions than answers. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The hour that followed was the longest of my life. I returned to my apartment, showered, and changed into civilian clothes, all while my mind raced with possibilities. What could Jessica know that I didn't? Had new evidence emerged about my case? Was there hope for vindication after all these months? The Starbucks was busy with the morning rush when I arrived, but I spotted Jessica immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, still in her dress blues, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup as if she were trying to warm herself from the inside out. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "You said you had information about my case. What kind of information?" Jessica took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the coffee shop before settling on mine. "The investigation into the intelligence leaks. It never stopped after you left. In fact, it intensified." "What do you mean?" "The real perpetrators got sloppy after you were gone. They thought they were in the clear, that you'd taken the fall and they could continue their operations without scrutiny." She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Admiral Patricia Hawkins and Captain Thomas Burke. They were systematically selling classified information to foreign intelligence services for over 2 years. The names hit me like a physical blow. Admiral Hawkins had been one of my superiors, someone I'd respected and trusted. Captain Burke had been instrumental in pushing for my resignation, claiming that my reckless behavior had compromised national security. "How do you know this?" "Because I was part of the new investigation team. We've been building a case for months, gathering evidence, tracking financial records, monitoring communications." Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Sarah, you were right about everything. The security breaches, the pattern of information leaks, the systematic nature of the operation. You were getting too close to the truth, so they framed you." The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. I struggled to process what Jessica was telling me. "Are you saying I was set up?" "Not just set up, sacrificed. They needed someone to take the blame, someone whose investigation would be discredited, along with their reputation. You were the perfect scapegoat, thorough enough to have uncovered the real operation, but junior enough to be expendable." My hands clenched into fists on the table. "And the Navy just let this happen." "The Navy didn't know. Hawkins and Burke were careful, they had allies in the right places, and they controlled the narrative. By the time the truth started to emerge, you were already gone." Jessica reached across the table, her voice urgent. "But Sarah, that's not the end of the story. The investigation is complete. Hawkins and Burke are being arrested today. There's going to be a full review of your case, and the Navy is prepared to offer you complete reinstatement, with back pay and a formal apology." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. After months of believing I was a disgraced former officer, I was learning that I'd been a victim of an elaborate conspiracy. The vindication I'd stopped hoping for was suddenly within reach. When is this happening? The arrests are scheduled for this afternoon. The review board is meeting tomorrow morning. Jessica checked her watch. Sarah, there's something else. Admiral Richardson wants to meet with you personally. He's flying in from Washington specifically to handle this situation. Admiral James Richardson. I knew the name. Everyone in the Navy did. He was the kind of officer who commanded respect through competence and integrity, not politics or favoritism. If he was personally involved, this was bigger than I'd imagined. Why didn't anyone contact me about this sooner? They couldn't risk it. If word had leaked before the arrests, Hawkins and Burke might have destroyed evidence or fled. The investigation had to be airtight. Jessica glanced around again, then leaned even closer. There's more. The review board isn't just going to reinstate you. They're recommending you for immediate promotion to captain, with a transfer to a new position in Washington. Captain. The rank I dreamed of achieving through years of dedicated service, now being offered as compensation for the injustice I'd suffered. It should have felt like victory, but instead I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was learning. What about my family? My brother's promotion ceremony is tonight. Jessica's expression softened. Sarah, Michael doesn't know about any of this yet. The Navy wanted to brief you first, given what you've been through. But he's going to find out soon enough. Everyone is. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the implications. My disgrace would be revealed as a fraud, my reputation restored, my career resurrected. But the damage to my relationships, to my sense of self, to my trust in the institution I'd served, could any of that be truly repaired? What am I supposed to do now? Admiral Richardson wants to meet with you at 1500 hours today. Naval Station Norfolk, Building 42. He'll brief you on the full situation and discuss your options going forward. Jessica stood up, smoothing her uniform. Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand. You're not just getting your life back. You're being recognized as a hero. Your investigation, your dedication to the truth, it's what ultimately brought down a major security threat to our nation. As Jessica walked away, I remained seated in the coffee shop, staring at my untouched coffee and trying to make sense of everything I'd just learned. In the span of an hour, I'd gone from being a disgraced former officer to a vindicated hero with a promising future ahead of me. But as I thought about Michael's promotion ceremony that evening, about the invitation I'd never received, about the months of isolation and doubt I'd endured, I realized that vindication was only the beginning. The real challenge would be figuring out how to rebuild not just my career, but my life, and the relationships that had been damaged by my disgrace. The clock on the wall read 11:30 a.m. I had 3.5 hours before my meeting with Admiral Richardson, 3.5 hours, to prepare for a conversation that would change everything. Again. Building 42 at Naval Station Norfolk stood like a fortress against the gray afternoon sky. I'd walked past it countless times during my years of service, but I'd never been inside. It housed the highest levels of naval command for the region, and today it would be the site of the most important conversation of my life. The security checkpoint was more thorough than usual. 2 Marines in dress blues checked my identification multiple times, made phone calls to verify my appointment, and escorted me through corridors lined with portraits of naval heroes and historical battle scenes. The weight of tradition and honor seemed to press down on me with each step. Admiral Richardson's temporary office was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the harbor where destroyers and cruisers bobbed gently at their moorings. A young lieutenant commander greeted me at the door, her bearing crisp and professional. Ms. Ross, Admiral Richardson will see you now. The office was spartanly furnished but commanding in its simplicity. Behind a massive oak desk sat a man who embodied everything I'd always believed the Navy should represent. Admiral James Richardson was in his late 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing confident but not arrogant. "Please, sit down." His voice was calm, measured, with just a hint of the Texas accent I'd heard in his congressional testimony recordings. "I want to begin by offering you an apology on behalf of the United States Navy. What happened to you was not just a miscarriage of justice. It was a betrayal of the values we've sworn to uphold. I sat rigidly in the chair across from his desk, unsure how to respond. 6 months ago, this man's predecessors had been ready to destroy my career. Now he was apologizing for their actions. Thank you, sir. But I need to understand what really happened. All of it. Admiral Richardson opened a thick folder on his desk, its contents marked with various classification stamps. Operation Tidewater began 18 months ago, when the CIA noticed patterns in intelligence leaks that seemed to originate from naval sources. The information being compromised was highly sensitive. Submarine positions, missile defense capabilities, personnel records of undercover operatives. He pulled out a series of photographs and documents, sliding them across the desk toward me. Admiral Hawkins and Captain Burke weren't just selling information. They were running a sophisticated espionage network that had been operating for over 3 years. They recruited junior officers, exploited personal financial difficulties, and created an entire infrastructure for systematic betrayal. The photographs showed surveillance images of both officers in various locations: parking garages, restaurants, hotel lobbies, always meeting with individuals whose faces had been circled in red. Foreign intelligence operatives, according to the annotations. When your investigation began to uncover their network, they realized they needed to eliminate the threat. You were getting too close, asking too many questions, connecting dots they'd thought they'd hidden well enough, so they set me up to take the fall. More than that, they manufactured evidence, manipulated digital records, and orchestrated a character assassination that would discredit not just you, but your entire investigation. Admiral Richardson's jaw tightened. They used your own thoroughness against you, making it appear that your diligent research was actually unauthorized access to classified systems. I stared at the documents spread across the desk, each one representing a piece of my destroyed reputation. How long have you known the truth? The full scope? Only for the past 6 weeks. But suspicions began almost immediately after your resignation. Your commanding officer, Captain Martinez, never believed the charges against you. He kept pushing for a deeper investigation, even after you were gone, Captain Martinez. I remembered him as a fair but demanding leader, someone who valued competence over politics. It was oddly comforting to know that at least one person in authority had questioned the official narrative. The breakthrough came when we intercepted communications between Burke and a known Russian intelligence operative. Once we had that thread, we were able to unravel the entire network. Admiral Richardson leaned back in his chair. Burke broke under interrogation this morning. He's provided a full confession, including detailed testimony about how they framed you. The words should have brought satisfaction, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. My vindication had come at the cost of months of pain, isolation, and self-doubt. The system I'd served faithfully had failed me when I needed it most. What happens now? Several things. First, Admiral Hawkins and Captain Burke are facing courts-martial on charges of espionage, treason, and conduct unbecoming. They'll spend the rest of their lives in military prison. Second, your service record is being completely expunged of any negative references. Your resignation is being reclassified as temporary leave, and you're being offered immediate reinstatement with full back pay. Admiral Richardson stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the harbor. But that's not all. Your investigation, your dedication to finding the truth, despite personal cost, it saved lives. The intelligence these traitors were selling would have compromised ongoing operations and put American servicemen and women in danger. He turned back to face me. The Navy doesn't just want to reinstate you, Commander Ross. We want to promote you to captain, effective immediately, with a transfer to a new position in naval intelligence in Washington. You'll be leading a new task force focused on preventing exactly this kind of internal threat, Captain Sarah Ross. The title I'd dreamed of achieving through years of dedicated service, now being offered as acknowledgement of the injustice I'd suffered. It should have felt like victory, but the emotions were too complex for simple celebration. There's something else, Admiral Richardson continued. Your brother's promotion ceremony tonight. He doesn't know about any of this yet. We wanted to brief you first, given what you've been through. But if you're amenable, we'd like to make your reinstatement and promotion public at the ceremony. The ceremony I hadn't been invited to, where my family would be celebrating Michael's success while having no idea that their supposedly disgraced daughter was about to be vindicated in the most public way possible. Does Michael know I'm being reinstated? No one outside of this investigation team knows. We've kept it compartmentalized for obvious security reasons. Admiral Richardson returned to his desk. I understand this puts you in a difficult position with your family. If you prefer, we can handle your reinstatement privately and announce it through official channels later. I thought about Michael's promotion ceremony, about the invitation I'd never received, about the months of feeling like a pariah in my own family. The prospect of walking into that room in uniform, vindicated and promoted, held a certain appeal, but it also felt like it might overshadow Michael's moment, turning his celebration into a drama about my resurrection. What would you recommend, sir? Admiral Richardson studied me for a long moment. In my experience, the truth has a way of coming out eventually. The question is whether you want to control how and when that happens. Your family deserves to know what really occurred, and you deserve to have your reputation restored publicly. He opened another folder, this one containing what looked like official orders. These are your reinstatement papers and promotion orders. If you sign them, you'll be Captain Sarah Ross again, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Your new position begins Monday morning. I stared at the papers, my signature line waiting at the bottom of each page. 6 months ago, I'd signed my resignation with a heavy heart, believing my naval career was over. Now I was being asked to sign my way back into service, back into the institution that had failed me but was now trying to make amends. I need to ask you something directly, sir. Can I trust the Navy again? Can I trust that this won't happen again? Admiral Richardson's expression grew serious. I won't lie to you, Captain. The Navy is made up of human beings, and human beings are fallible. We failed you once, and that failure will haunt this institution for years to come. But we're implementing new safeguards, new oversight procedures, new protections for whistleblowers and investigators. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I can't promise you'll never face challenges or opposition in your career, but I can promise you that what happened to you will never happen again on my watch. You have my personal guarantee of that. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. I could walk away, start fresh in the civilian world, leave the Navy and its politics behind forever. Or I could take back my career, my rank, my place in the institution that had shaped my adult life. I picked up the pen and signed my name on each document, the familiar motion feeling both foreign and natural after 6 months away from military life. Welcome back, Captain Ross, Admiral Richardson said, extending his hand. Now let's discuss tonight's ceremony and how we're going to surprise your family. The Naval Station Norfolk Officers Club buzzed with energy as evening approached. Through the tall windows, I could see cars pulling into the parking lot, families arriving for Michael's promotion ceremony, officers in dress blues greeting each other with warm handshakes and laughter. The scene I'd imagined watching from my apartment window was unfolding just 50 yards away. But I wasn't watching from my apartment. I was standing in a small preparation room adjacent to the main ballroom, wearing a crisp navy dress blue uniform that had been hastily retrieved from the base exchange and tailored to fit. The gold stripes on my sleeves caught the light, 4 stripes now instead of 3. Captain Sarah Ross, a title I was still adjusting to hearing in my mind. Admiral Richardson stood nearby, reviewing the evening's revised program with his aide. The original plan had been simple. Michael would receive his promotion to captain, give a brief speech, and the evening would conclude with dinner and socializing. Now the ceremony would include an additional surprise that none of the guests could have anticipated. Are you ready for this? Admiral Richardson asked, his tone gentle but confident. Honestly, I wasn't sure. The past 4 hours had been a whirlwind of briefings, paperwork, and preparation. I'd called in sick to a job interview I'd had scheduled for Monday morning. An interview that now seemed like a relic from another lifetime. Everything had changed so quickly that I felt like I was living in someone else's story. I keep thinking about my parents, I admitted. They've spent the last 6 months believing their daughter was a disgrace to the family name. Mom stopped talking about me to her friends. Dad couldn't even look at me during our last dinner together. That's going to change tonight, Admiral Richardson said firmly. Your family deserves to know the truth, and you deserve to have your honor restored in front of the people who matter most to you. Through the door, I could hear the sound of the crowd settling into their seats. A military band played patriotic songs as guests found their tables. I caught glimpses of familiar faces through the crack in the door. Former colleagues, family friends, people who had known me before my disgrace and had probably spent months wondering what had really happened. My stomach knotted as I spotted my parents near the front of the room. Mom wore her navy blue dress with the pearl necklace Dad had given her for their anniversary. Dad was in his dress uniform, his own medals and ribbons a testament to his decades of Army service. They looked proud but subdued, as if they were trying to celebrate Michael's success while carrying the weight of disappointment about their daughter. Michael stood near the podium, resplendent in his dress blues, accepting congratulations from well-wishers. He looked every inch the naval officer I'd always known him to be, confident, charismatic, deserving of the honor he was about to receive. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite the invitation that had never come, I felt a surge of pride watching him. The ceremony began with the presentation of colors and the national anthem. As the crowd sang, I found myself mouthing the words I'd sung countless times at similar ceremonies throughout my career. The familiar ritual brought back memories of my own promotions, my own moments of recognition and pride. Captain Elena Vasquez, Michael's commanding officer, stepped to the podium to begin the formal proceedings. She spoke eloquently about Michael's service record, his leadership qualities, and his contributions to the Navy. The promotion ceremony proceeded exactly as planned: the reading of orders, the removal of commander's insignia, the pinning of captain's bars. Michael's voice was steady and confident as he gave his acceptance speech, thanking his family, his mentors, and his fellow officers. He spoke about the values of service, honor, and commitment that had guided his career. He mentioned our parents specifically, crediting them with instilling in him the principles that had shaped his success. Spoke about the values of Sorir. Values of Sorir. He didn't mention me at all. As Michael concluded his remarks and the applause died down, Captain Vasquez returned to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move to the reception, Admiral Richardson has a special announcement. This was it, the moment that would change everything again. Admiral Richardson approached the podium with measured steps, his presence commanding immediate attention. The room fell silent, curious about what the Admiral from Washington might have to say at a routine promotion ceremony. Good evening, everyone. I apologize for the unexpected addition to tonight's program, but I have some important news to share that directly relates to this gathering and to a member of the Ross family. I saw my parents exchange glances, confusion evident on their faces. Michael's expression shifted from polite attention to something approaching concern. 6 months ago, the Navy suffered a significant loss when Commander Sarah Ross submitted her resignation under circumstances that called into question her integrity and her commitment to our service. Admiral Richardson's voice carried clearly through the room. Tonight, I'm here to tell you that Commander Ross, now Captain Ross, was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy designed to cover up one of the most serious security breaches in recent naval history. The room erupted in murmurs and whispers. I could see heads turning as people tried to process what they were hearing. My parents looked stunned, my mother's hand flying to her mouth. The investigation that led to Captain Ross's resignation was not the result of any wrongdoing on her part. Instead, it was a deliberate attempt by corrupt senior officers to silence an intelligence officer who had uncovered their espionage activities. Admiral Richardson paused, letting his words sink in. Admiral Patricia Hawkins and Captain Thomas Burke were arrested this morning on charges of treason, espionage, and conduct unbecoming. They will face courts-martial and, if convicted, will spend the rest of their lives in prison. The murmurs grew louder. I could see shock and disbelief on faces throughout the room. Some people were looking around, as if expecting to see me materialize from thin air. Captain Sarah Ross's investigation was not just thorough, it was heroic. Her dedication to uncovering the truth, despite personal cost, ultimately saved lives and protected national security. The Navy owes her an apology, and tonight, we're offering something more than that. Admiral Richardson gestured toward the side door where I was waiting. Captain Ross has been reinstated with full honors, promoted to captain, and assigned to lead a new task force in naval intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Captain Sarah Ross. The door opened and I stepped into the ballroom. The room was dead silent for a moment, as if everyone needed time to process what they were seeing. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with a few people and grew until the entire room was on its feet, clapping and cheering. I walked toward the podium, my legs feeling unsteady despite months of military-bearing training. As I passed the tables, I could see faces I recognized, colleagues who had avoided me after my resignation, friends who had stopped returning my calls, superiors who had written me off as a security risk. Now they were applauding, some with tears in their eyes. But my focus was on my family. My mother was crying openly, her hands pressed to her face. My father was standing at rigid attention, his own eyes wet with tears. And Michael was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but also something that might have been relief, or guilt, or both. I reached the podium and accepted the microphone from Admiral Richardson. The applause continued for what felt like an eternity before finally dying down. I looked out at the crowd, at all the faces that had been part of my military life, and tried to find the right words. 6 months ago, I left this room believing my career was over, my reputation destroyed, my service to my country ended in disgrace, I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected. Tonight I stand before you not just vindicated, but grateful. Grateful for the truth, grateful for justice, and grateful for the opportunity to continue serving. I paused, my eyes finding my parents in the crowd. To my family, I'm sorry for the pain my situation caused you. I know you didn't understand what was happening, and I couldn't explain it because I didn't understand it myself. But I never stopped believing in the values you taught me, and I never stopped hoping that the truth would eventually come to light. Finally, I looked directly at Michael. To my brother, congratulations on your promotion. You've earned every stripe on your sleeve, and I'm proud to serve in the same Navy as you. I hope we can celebrate together, the way families should. The applause that followed was thunderous, but all I could see was my family pushing through the crowd toward me, my mother's arms outstretched, my father's proud smile, and Michael's face transformed by an emotion I hadn't seen there in months: unconditional love. The reception that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. What had begun as a celebration of Michael's promotion had transformed into something much more profound, a restoration of faith, family, and honor that seemed to touch everyone in the room. My mother hadn't let go of my hand for the past hour, as if she were afraid I might disappear again. She kept introducing me to people as my daughter, Captain Sarah Ross, emphasizing my rank with a pride that was almost overwhelming. The guilt in her eyes had been replaced by fierce maternal protectiveness, as if she were trying to make up for 6 months of doubt with pure conviction. Dad stood nearby, his military bearing intact but his emotions closer to the surface than I'd seen since childhood. When Colonel James Ross cried, it was quietly and with dignity, but the tears were unmistakable. He'd pulled me aside during cocktail hour and simply said, "I should have known. I should have trusted my daughter." No elaborate apology, no excuses, just the straightforward acknowledgement that was so characteristic of him. But it was my conversation with Michael that had surprised me most. He'd approached me during a lull in the congratulations and well-wishers, his face serious despite the celebratory atmosphere around us. "Sarah, we need to talk. Privately." We'd stepped out onto the club's terrace, overlooking the harbor where naval vessels were silhouetted against the evening sky. The November air was crisp, but neither of us seemed to notice the cold. "I owe you an apology that's bigger than anything I know how to say," Michael began, his voice tight with emotion. "I should have fought for you. I should have questioned the charges, demanded a more thorough investigation, stood by my sister when she needed me most. Michael, you couldn't have known, but I should have." He turned to face me fully. "You're my sister. I've known you my entire life. I know your character, your integrity, your dedication to doing what's right. Instead of trusting that knowledge, I let doubt creep in. I let the opinions of others influence how I saw you." The admission hung between us like a bridge I hadn't expected him to build. For months, I'd assumed Michael's distance was about protecting his own career, avoiding association with his disgraced sister. Learning that it had been about his own internal struggle with doubt and loyalty made his absence hurt differently, but also made his presence now mean more. "I didn't invite you tonight because I was a coward," he continued. "I told myself it was to protect you from awkward questions, to spare you from having to face people who might judge you. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I didn't want to deal with the questions about my sister's situation, didn't want my moment to be overshadowed by controversy." "Your promotion is important, Michael. You've worked hard for this." "My promotion means nothing if I achieved it by abandoning my family." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. This was going to be my speech tonight, before Admiral Richardson's announcement changed everything. He handed me a small piece of paper, folded and worn as if it had been carried for a long time. I unfolded it and read his handwritten notes in the dim light from the building. "Thank my family, especially my sister Sarah, whose dedication to service and unwavering integrity have always been my inspiration, even during her most difficult times." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. He'd planned to mention me after all, to publicly acknowledge me despite my disgrace. The speech he'd actually given, omitting any reference to me, had been a last-minute decision born of uncertainty and fear. "I wrote that 3 weeks ago," Michael said quietly. "I've been carrying it around, going back and forth about whether I had the courage to say it. Tonight, when Admiral Richardson announced your vindication, I realized that courage isn't about taking risks when you're certain of the outcome. It's about standing by what you believe is right, even when you're not sure." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights of the naval base twinkle across the water. The sounds of the reception drifted out from inside: laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses toasting success and redemption. "So what happens now?" Michael asked. "I start my new position Monday morning in Washington. Task Force Commander, hunting down threats like the ones that destroyed my career the first time." I folded his speech notes carefully and handed them back to him. "And you continue being the outstanding naval officer you've always been. We both serve our country, support our family, and try to do better than we did before. Will you forgive me?" The question was simple, but the answer was complex. Forgiveness wasn't just about absolving Michael of his doubts and distance. It was about releasing my own anger and hurt, about choosing to rebuild rather than remain broken. "I forgave you months ago," I told him honestly. "I was angry and hurt, but I never stopped loving you. Family doesn't work that way." Michael pulled me into a hug that reminded me of our childhood, when we'd been each other's closest allies against the challenges of military family life. We'd moved together from base to base, supported each other through the difficulties of having parents whose duty sometimes took them far from home. That bond had been tested by my disgrace, but it hadn't been broken. When we returned to the reception, the evening took on a different quality. Instead of feeling like an interloper at my brother's celebration, I felt like part of a family again. Colleagues approached me with genuine warmth, some apologizing for their distance during my difficulties, others simply expressing happiness at my vindication. Captain Martinez, my former commanding officer, sought me out specifically. "I never believed those charges for a second," he said firmly. "I'm sorry it took so long for the truth to come out, but I'm grateful it finally did." Jessica Chen appeared at my elbow, her earlier nervousness replaced by obvious relief. "I'm so glad this worked out," she said. "I've been carrying the weight of this secret for weeks, knowing what you were going through and not being able to say anything. Even people I didn't know well approached to congratulate me and express their respect for what I'd endured. The naval community, I realized, had been as much a victim of the conspiracy as I had been. My disgrace had shaken their faith in the integrity of their institution. My vindication restored not just my reputation, but their confidence in the system they served." As the evening wound down, Admiral Richardson approached our family table. "Captain Ross, I wanted to give you these personally," he said, handing me a leather portfolio. "Your new orders, security clearances, and briefing materials for Monday morning. Welcome to Washington." I accepted the portfolio with the weight of understanding what it represented. This wasn't just a job or a promotion. It was a mission. My experience as a victim of internal corruption had prepared me uniquely to prevent others from suffering the same fate. There's something else, Admiral Richardson continued. The Secretary of the Navy wants to meet with you next week. There's talk of recommending you for the Navy Distinguished Service Medal for your role in uncovering this espionage ring. A medal for being framed seemed ironic, but I understood the reasoning. My investigation, even though it had led to my temporary downfall, had ultimately protected national security and exposed traitors. Sometimes heroism looked different than expected. As we prepared to leave the officers' club, my family gathered around me in the parking lot. The November night was clear and cold, with stars visible above the harbor lights. Dad stood at attention and rendered a crisp salute to his newly promoted daughter. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd been carrying all evening. Michael stood beside me, his captain's bars catching the light just like mine. I'm proud of both my children, Dad said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades of military leadership. You've both honored the family name and your service to the country. Dinner Sunday? Mom asked, already planning the first of many family gatherings that would rebuild what had been damaged. I'll be there, I promised. Driving back to my apartment in Norfolk for what would be one of the last times, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd driven this same route in disgrace, believing my career was over and my reputation destroyed. Tonight, I was returning as a vindicated hero with a promotion and a new mission. The apartment that had felt like a prison cell now seemed like a temporary way station. I'd be moving to Washington within the week, starting a new chapter of my life and my career. The boxes I'd been avoiding unpacking would finally serve their purpose, just not in the way I'd expected. But more important than the career restoration or the promotion was the return of my family's faith. The doubt in my parents' eyes had been replaced by pride. The distance in my brother's manner had given way to renewed closeness. The isolation that had nearly broken my spirit had been transformed into a deeper appreciation for the relationships that truly mattered. As I stood in my small apartment, looking out at the naval base where I'd once served and where I'd been vindicated, I realized that sometimes the most profound victories come disguised as defeats. My disgrace had been the catalyst for uncovering a threat that could have damaged national security for years. My resilience during those dark months had prepared me for the challenges ahead. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, I was simply Captain Sarah Ross, honored daughter, proud sister, and faithful servant of the country I'd never stopped loving, even when it seemed to have stopped loving me. The invitation to my brother's promotion ceremony had never come, but sometimes the most important events are the ones we're not invited to attend. Sometimes we have to create our own invitations, write our own endings, and trust that the truth will ultimately prevail. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, serving faithfully, and never giving up on the belief that honor and integrity will eventually triumph over corruption and deceit. And sometimes, just sometimes, the general really does say, "Welcome, Admiral Ross," or in my case, "Welcome back, Captain Ross," exactly when you need to hear it most. 3 months later, the Pentagon corridors hummed with their usual blend of urgency and routine. My office on the 4th floor overlooked the Potomac River, a view that never failed to remind me of the magnitude of the responsibilities that came with my new position. The nameplate on my desk read, Captain Sarah Ross, Director, Internal Security Task Force, a title that still felt surreal some mornings. The task force had grown from an ambitious concept to a fully operational unit in record time. We had 12 investigators, 4 analysts, and partnerships with every major intelligence agency in the government. Our mandate was simple in theory but complex in execution. Identify, investigate, and neutralize internal security threats before they could compromise national security. Our first major case had been a logistics colonel at Fort Bragg, who'd been selling information about troop movements to journalists for profit. The second involved a Navy contractor who'd been planting surveillance devices in classified facilities. Each successful operation reinforced the importance of the work we were doing and validated the Navy's decision to create our unit. But success brought its own challenges. The higher our profile became, the more scrutiny we faced from officials who viewed internal investigations as threats to their own positions. I'd learned to navigate Pentagon politics with the same precision I'd once applied to intelligence analysis, understanding that protecting the institution sometimes meant confronting powerful people within it. My secretary knocked on my office door, interrupting my review of a suspicious financial pattern we'd identified in naval procurement contracts. "Captain Ross? You have a visitor. Admiral Richardson is here to see you." Admiral Richardson entered with the measured stride I'd come to associate with his visits. Over the past 3 months, he'd become more than a superior officer. He'd become a mentor and advocate whose guidance had been invaluable as I'd established the task force. "Sarah, how are things progressing with the Peterson investigation?" Commander Peterson was a rising star in naval intelligence who'd triggered our attention through irregularities in his security clearance renewal. The preliminary investigation suggested possible foreign contacts that hadn't been properly disclosed, but we were still gathering evidence. "We should have a complete picture within the week, sir. The pattern suggests poor judgment rather than malicious intent, but we're being thorough." Admiral Richardson nodded approvingly. "Good. I have confidence in your team's work." He paused, his expression shifting to something more personal. "Actually, I'm here about something else entirely. I have news that I wanted to share with you personally." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew an official-looking document with multiple seals and signatures. "The Secretary of the Navy has approved your recommendation for the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. The ceremony is scheduled for next month." The medal represented the second highest honor the Navy could bestow, typically reserved for officers whose actions had significantly impacted national security. When Admiral Richardson had first mentioned the possibility months earlier, I'd assumed it was just ceremonial recognition. Learning that it had been officially approved felt overwhelming. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I deserve recognition for being the victim of a conspiracy." "You're not receiving this medal for being a victim, Captain. You're receiving it for refusing to become one." Admiral Richardson set the document on my desk. "Your investigation exposed a network that had been compromising national security for years. Your perseverance during the darkest period of your career led directly to preventing future breaches. That's not victimhood. That's heroism." The medal ceremony would be held at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, with my family and colleagues in attendance. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd gone from being someone my family was ashamed to acknowledge to someone they'd watch receive one of the Navy's highest honors. "There's something else," Admiral Richardson continued. "The success of your task force has caught attention at the highest levels. The Secretary of Defense wants to expand the program across all service branches. You'd be promoted to Admiral and take command of a joint task force with significantly broader authority." Admiral Sarah Ross. The rank that represented the pinnacle of naval leadership, typically achieved after decades of command experience and political navigation. I was being offered it at an age when most officers were still competing for their first major command. "That's unexpected, sir." "It's also well-deserved. Your work here has proven that internal security threats require specialized attention and dedicated resources. The other service branches want to replicate your success." Admiral Richardson leaned forward. "This would mean a move to a new facility in Virginia, a larger staff, and oversight of investigations across the Army, Air Force, Marines, and Space Force." The opportunity was staggering in its scope and potential impact. It would also mean leaving behind the Navy-specific focus that had driven my passion for this work, and entering the more complex world of joint operations and inter-service politics. "I'd like some time to consider it, sir." "Of course. Take all the time you need." Admiral Richardson stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Sarah, I want you to know that watching you rebuild your career and create something meaningful from your experience has been one of the highlights of my own service. Whatever you decide about the promotion, you should be proud of what you've accomplished." After he left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the medal authorization and thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The woman who'd sat in a cramped Norfolk apartment 6 months ago, reading about her brother's promotion ceremony and feeling forgotten, seemed like a different person entirely. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. "Family dinner Sunday. Mom's making your favorite lasagna. Don't even think about working late." The Sunday dinners had become a cherished tradition since my vindication. Every week, our family gathered at our parents' house in Virginia Beach, sharing meals and stories and rebuilding the bonds that had been strained by my disgrace. Michael had been transferred to a destroyer squadron based out of Norfolk, making the weekly gatherings possible for both of us. During these dinners, we never talked about my months of exile or the pain that my situation had caused the family. Instead, we focused on the present and future. Michael's new command responsibilities, my task force's successes, Dad's volunteer work with veteran organizations, Mom's renewed involvement with the Navy Spouses Club. But the healing went deeper than just family meals. My relationship with Michael had evolved into something stronger than it had been before my ordeal. The crisis had forced us both to examine what really mattered and had ultimately brought us closer together. He'd become one of my closest advisors on naval politics and one of my strongest supporters when task force operations faced resistance from established interests. The medal ceremony 3 weeks later was held in the Naval Academy's historic Memorial Hall, surrounded by plaques honoring graduates who died in service to their country. The setting reminded everyone present of the sacrifices inherent in military service and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. My parents sat in the front row, their pride evident in every gesture and expression. Mom wore the same Navy dress she'd worn to Michael's promotion ceremony, but her demeanor was completely different. Confident, radiant, eager to share her daughter's moment with anyone who would listen. Dad had worn his Army uniform, his own ribbons and decorations creating a visual bridge between his service and mine. During the reception following the ceremony, I'd overheard him telling another retired officer, "Both my children are now O6s. The Army raised them right, but the Navy finished the job." Michael had flown in from Norfolk specifically for the ceremony, bringing with him several officers from his squadron who wanted to show their support. His presence meant more to me than any official recognition because it represented the complete restoration of our family unity. But the most meaningful moment came during my acceptance speech. When I looked out at the audience and saw faces that represented every phase of my naval career, Jessica Chen, who'd risked her own position to warn me about the conspiracy. Captain Martinez, who'd never stopped believing in my innocence. Admiral Richardson, who'd fought to ensure justice was served. "This medal represents more than individual achievement," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the Memorial Hall. "It represents the strength that comes from institutional integrity, from colleagues who refuse to accept injustice, and from families who provide unwavering support during the darkest times." I paused, finding my parents' faces in the crowd. 6 months ago, I believed my naval career was over, ended by circumstances beyond my control. Today I stand before you as proof that the truth has power, that integrity matters, and that second chances can lead to achievements we never thought possible. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, but it was the tears in my mother's eyes that told me everything I needed to know about how far we'd all come. After the ceremony, as guests mingled during the reception, Admiral Richardson approached me one final time about the Joint Task Force position. "Have you made a decision about the promotion?" I'd spent weeks considering the opportunity, weighing the potential impact against the personal costs. The position would mean larger responsibilities, greater influence, and the chance to expand our anti-corruption efforts across all military branches. It would also mean longer hours, more travel, and increased political pressure. "I've decided to accept, sir, but with one condition." "What's that?" "I want to keep Captain Chen as my deputy director and bring Captain Martinez as our senior investigator. The success of this program depends on having people I trust completely, people who've proven their commitment to doing what's right regardless of personal cost." Admiral Richardson smiled. "I think that can be arranged. Congratulations, Admiral Select Ross. Your new assignment begins in 60 days. Admiral Sarah Ross. The title still seemed impossible, but I was beginning to understand that impossible things happen to people who refused to give up, who maintained their integrity despite pressure to compromise, and who believed that justice would eventually prevail. As I drove back to Washington that evening, past the monuments and memorials that honored generations of American service members, I reflected on the circular nature of my journey. I'd started as a young officer eager to serve her country. I'd become a victim of the very corruption I'd sworn to fight. Now I was a leader tasked with ensuring that future officers would never face the betrayal I'd experienced. The phone call came the next morning while I was reviewing personnel files for my new position. It was Michael, calling from his ship during a brief port visit. "I saw the news about your promotion to Admiral. I wanted to be the first to congratulate you properly." "Thank you. It still doesn't feel real." "It should. You've earned every star on those insignia." He paused, and I could hear the sounds of shipboard activity in the background. Sarah, I want you to know that watching you rebuild your career, seeing how you've turned your experience into something that protects other people, it's made me a better officer and a better brother. We've both grown from this experience. Yes, but you've done something more than that. You've turned your worst moment into your greatest contribution. That takes a special kind of courage. After we ended the call, I sat in my office looking out at the Potomac River and thinking about the invitation that never came. The brother who doubted me, and the family that had been torn apart by circumstances none of us had fully understood. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the work ahead, the officers who would benefit from stronger protections against corruption, and the knowledge that sometimes the most profound victories come from the most devastating defeats. Admiral Sarah Ross, Director of Joint Internal Security Operations. The title that would define the next phase of my career, built on the foundation of integrity that had never wavered, even when everything else had fallen apart. The invitation to my brother's promotion ceremony had never come, but sometimes the most important journeys begin with doors that don't open, paths that seem blocked, and futures that appear impossible. Sometimes the general really does say, "Welcome, Admiral Ross," exactly when you need to hear it most, and exactly when you're ready to deserve it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.